Janet Johnson had 3 rules. Keep her head down, finish the job, and never look the boss in the eye. But the second she stepped into Li Kang's marble fortress and felt the weight of his gaze strip her bare, all 3 shattered like glass. He was Seoul's most feared Mafia king, a man who killed with a signature and collected enemies like trophies. Yet the way he watched her move across his floor made her skin burn and her breath catch in a way that screamed danger. She didn't know it yet, but he'd already decided. She would be his, tonight, and every night after. Welcome to Afro-Korean Films Besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Janet Johnson shifted the cleaning supplies in her arms, trying to ignore the way her new employer's gaze made her skin prickle with awareness. She'd been warned that Li Kang was dangerous, that he ruled Seoul's underground with an iron fist and a taste for violence, but nobody had mentioned the way he looked at her, like she was something he wanted to devour and protect in equal measure. His jaw was carved from stone, his dark hair pushed back to reveal a face too beautiful to belong to a killer, and when he finally spoke, his voice was silk wrapped around steel. "You're late," he said, though she'd arrived exactly on time. "Traffic," Janet replied, refusing to apologize for something that wasn't her fault. She watched his eyes narrow slightly, a flicker of something, amusement, intrigue, crossing his features before he turned away. "Follow me," Kang commanded, already moving through the penthouse with the lethal grace of a predator. Janet obeyed, her heart hammering as she took in the sprawling space, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture that screamed wealth, and an underlying coldness that made the luxurious rooms feel like a beautiful prison. The next morning, Janet arrived early, determined to prove herself capable, despite the unsettling tension that had followed her home the night before. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the way Kang had watched her every movement, as if cataloguing her existence for some purpose she couldn't fathom. Now, standing in his pristine kitchen, she focused on her tasks, scrubbing counters that were already spotless and organizing pantries that didn't need organizing. "You don't need to work so hard," a voice said behind her, making her jump. Kang stood in the doorway, dressed in nothing but black silk pajama pants, his chest bare and revealing a body sculpted by violence and discipline. Janet's mouth went dry. "I'm just doing my job," she managed, turning back to the counter with more force than necessary. "Your job," Kang repeated, moving closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, "doesn't require you to erase fingerprints that don't exist." His hand reached past her to set down a coffee cup, his arm brushing hers in a contact that sent electricity racing down her spine. Later that afternoon, Kang sat in his office, conducting business with the ruthless efficiency that had made him Seoul's most feared crime lord before age 30. But his mind kept drifting to the woman currently dusting his bookshelves, her curves moving beneath her uniform in ways that made his concentration splinter. He'd built his empire on control, on the ability to separate emotion from necessity, yet Janet Johnson had walked into his life and shattered that discipline in less than 24 hours. "Boss," his second-in-command Yoo Jun-seo said carefully, "you're not listening." Kang's gaze snapped to him, cold and dangerous. "I heard every word. The shipment arrives Thursday. Security will be doubled. Anything else?" The dismissal was clear, and Jun-seo wisely retreated, though not before Kang caught the knowing look in his eyes. By the end of the week, Janet had settled into an uneasy rhythm. She arrived at 7 each morning, cleaned rooms that never seemed dirty, and tried desperately to ignore the way Kang appeared in whatever space she occupied, reading in the library while she dusted, working at the kitchen island while she prepared his meals, standing silently in doorways just watching her with an intensity that made her hands shake. "Why did you take this job?" he asked one evening, his question catching her off guard as she folded laundry in his bedroom. Janet looked up to find him leaning against the doorframe, his suit jacket discarded and his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. "I needed the money," she answered honestly, "and your agency said you paid well." "That's not what I asked." Kang moved into the room, each step deliberate. "Why this job? You could work anywhere. You're educated, capable, yet you chose to clean for a man like me." Janet's spine stiffened. "A man like you?" "A monster," he said softly, now close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "That's what they call me, isn't it? The devil of soul. The man who kills without mercy and rules without conscience." "I don't believe in monsters," Janet whispered, even as her heart raced at his proximity. "Only men who make monstrous choices." Something shifted in Kang's expression, a crack in his armor that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "Then you're a fool," he said, but his hand rose to brush a strand of hair from her face with devastating gentleness. The following morning, everything changed. Janet arrived to find the penthouse in chaos, suited men with barely concealed weapons moving through the space, their conversations stopping the moment she entered. Kang stood at the windows, his posture rigid, and when he turned to look at her, his eyes were emptier than she'd ever seen them. "You can't be here today," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But leave." The command cracked through the air like a whip, and Janet flinched despite herself. She gathered her things and fled, her chest tight with confusion and something that felt dangerously close to hurt. That evening, she sat in her tiny apartment, staring at her phone and fighting the urge to call the agency and quit. She didn't understand why Kang's dismissal had affected her so deeply, why the coldness in his voice had felt like a physical blow. He was her employer, nothing more, yet some treacherous part of her heart had started weaving fantasies she had no right to entertain. A knock at her door made her freeze. It was nearly midnight. Who would visit at this hour? Janet approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to find Kang standing in her hallway, still in his suit but dishevelled in a way she'd never seen, his hair mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "What are you doing here?" she asked, opening the door a crack. "Let me in." It wasn't a request, but the rawness in his voice made her comply, despite every logical protest screaming in her mind. Kang entered her modest space, looking simultaneously out of place and devastatingly perfect among her second-hand furniture and cheerful throw pillows. "How did you even find my address?" Janet demanded, crossing her arms over the thin tank top and shorts she'd changed into for bed. "I find everything," Kang replied, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made heat pool in her stomach. "I know where you live, where you shop, where you go when you think no one's watching. I've known since the day you walked into my home." "That's—" Janet's protest died when he closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with a desperation that stole her breath. "I tried to stay away," he whispered, his forehead dropping to touch hers. "I tried to be the monster they say I am, to treat you like everyone else. But I can't. God help me, Janet, I can't." A few days later, Janet returned to work as if that midnight confession had never happened. Kang had left her apartment without explanation, and she'd convinced herself it had been some strange dream brought on by stress and attraction she had no business feeling. But the moment she entered the penthouse, she knew something fundamental had shifted. Kang was waiting for her in the foyer, dressed immaculately in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, leading her to his office without giving her a chance to refuse. Once inside, he closed the door and leaned against his desk, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "What happened the other night?" she began, but he cut her off. "Was a mistake," he finished, though his eyes told a different story. "I crossed a line. It won't happen again." Janet should have felt relieved. Instead, disappointment crashed through her with unexpected force. "Fine," she said tightly. "Is that all?" "No." Kang's jaw clenched. "There's going to be a gathering here tomorrow night. Business associates. You'll serve drinks and stay out of sight as much as possible. Do not speak unless spoken to, do not make eye contact with anyone, and do not, under any circumstances, leave the kitchen unless I specifically call for you." The coldness in his tone made her bristle. "I'm not an idiot. I know how to be invisible." "Good," he said, but something flickered in his eyes. something that looked like regret mixed with fear. Because the men coming here tomorrow are dangerous, more dangerous than you can possibly imagine. And if any of them look at you the way I... He stopped abruptly, his hands fisting at his sides. The next evening, Janet dressed in the black cocktail dress Kang's assistant had delivered to her apartment with instructions to wear it for the gathering. The fabric hugged her curves in ways that made her self-conscious, the neckline modest but the overall effect undeniably feminine. When she arrived at the penthouse, Kang's reaction was immediate and visceral. His eyes darkened, his jaw clenched, and for a moment she thought he might send her away. "You look..." he started, then stopped, shaking his head. "Stay in the kitchen, please." But fate had other plans. 2 hours into the gathering, one of Kang's guests, a middle-aged man with cruel eyes and expensive cologne, wandered into the kitchen looking for more whiskey. His gaze landed on Janet like a predator spotting prey, and his smile made her skin crawl. "Well, well," he said in accented English. "Kang's been hiding a treasure. What's your name, beautiful?" "I'm just the help," Janet replied, keeping her voice neutral as she prepared his drink. "Just the help," the man repeated, moving closer. "With a body like that? I don't think so. How much does he pay you? I'll double it if you come work for me." Before Janet could respond, Kang appeared in the doorway, his expression carved from ice and fury. "Mr. Tanaka," he said, his voice lethally soft. "I believe your drink is ready. Janet will bring it to you in the lounge." The threat beneath his polite words was unmistakable, and Tanaka wisely retreated. But Kang remained, his eyes blazing as he looked at Janet. "Did he touch you?" he demanded. "No, Did he touch you?" Each word was bitten off, his control hanging by a thread. "No," Janet confirmed, shocked by the barely leashed violence radiating from him. "Kang, I'm fine." His hands gripped the counter between them, knuckles white. "If he had," Kang said quietly, "I would have killed him where he stood. Consequences be damned. Do you understand? I would have started a war for you." The confession hung between them, raw and terrifying and impossibly romantic. Janet's heart hammered against her ribs as Kang pushed away from the counter and left without another word, leaving her trembling in the kitchen with the weight of his declaration. The following week passed in excruciating tension. Kang avoided her whenever possible, communicating through terse notes and his assistant. Janet told herself she should be grateful for the distance, that getting involved with a man like him would only lead to heartbreak and danger. But her traitorous body ached for his presence, for the way his eyes had burned with possessive fury when Tanaka had approached her. Then, on Friday evening, everything exploded. Janet was preparing to leave when shouting erupted from Kang's office, followed by the sound of something shattering. She rushed toward the noise despite her better judgment, arriving just as the office door flew open and a bloodied man stumbled out. "You're insane!" the man spat, blood dripping from his split lip. "Over a woman! You're willing to destroy everything we've built over some..." Kang's fist connected with the man's jaw before he could finish, sending him crashing into the wall. "Say one more word about her," Kang snarled, "and I'll make sure you never speak again." Security appeared to drag the man away, and Kang stood breathing hard, his knuckles bleeding, his usual composure shattered. When his eyes found Janet, something raw and desperate crossed his face. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said hoarsely. "What was he talking about?" Janet asked, moving toward him despite every self-preservation instinct screaming at her to run. "What did you destroy?" "A partnership," Kang admitted, allowing her to take his injured hand and examine it. "One worth billions. He wanted you as part of a deal, a gift to seal our arrangement. I told him to go to hell." Janet's breath caught. "You ended a business deal because of me?" "I'd end the world for you," Kang said simply, his free hand cupping her cheek. "Don't you understand yet, Janet? From the moment you walked into my life, nothing else has mattered. Not my empire, not my reputation, not my carefully constructed control, just you. Only you." Later that night, after she'd bandaged his hands and the penthouse had fallen silent, Kang pulled Janet into his arms with a desperation that made her heart ache. "I'm not a good man," he whispered against her hair. "I've done terrible things. But with you, I want to be better. You make me want to be better." "Then be better," Janet whispered back, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Starting now." Kang's kiss was devastating, possessive and tender and filled with months of restraint, finally breaking. He kissed her like she was air, and he was drowning, like she was salvation, and he was damned. His hands mapped her curves with reverence, and when he pulled back, his eyes were blazing. "I can't promise you safety," he said raggedly. "My world is violent and cruel, but I can promise that I will protect you with everything I have. I will burn down anyone who tries to hurt you, and I will spend every day proving that you're mine just as much as I'm yours." "Show me," Janet breathed, and Kang needed no further invitation. He swept her into his arms, carrying her to his bedroom with determined strides. The space was as austere as the rest of his home: dark woods, crisp linens, minimal decoration. But when he laid her on his bed and followed her down, the coldness disappeared beneath the heat of their connection. Kang worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, memorizing every curve, every gasp, every shiver. He was simultaneously rough and gentle, possessive and reverent, taking his time to unravel her even as his own control frayed at the edges. When they finally came together, it was with an intensity that felt like coming home and stepping into wildfire simultaneously. Kang's forehead pressed to hers, his breath ragged, his body trembling with the effort of holding back. "Mine," he whispered like a prayer and a vow. "Say it, Janet. Say you're mine." "Yours," she gasped, her nails digging into his shoulders as pleasure built to an unbearable peak. "I'm yours, Kang. Yours." The confession shattered what remained of his restraint, and they lost themselves in each other completely, the world narrowing to nothing but tangled limbs, whispered promises, and the feeling of finally being exactly where they belonged. Hours later, as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Janet lay in Kang's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat beneath her ear. Panic began to creep in. What had she done? He was her employer, a criminal, a man whose world she didn't belong in. This had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that would only complicate everything. She needed to leave before he woke, before he looked at her with regret or worse, pity. Carefully, Janet extracted herself from Kang's embrace, gathering her clothes in the pre-dawn darkness. She dressed quickly, her heart hammering, and slipped from the bedroom without looking back. If she had, she would have seen Kang's eyes open, would have seen the devastation that crossed his face as he let her go, believing she deserved the choice even as it destroyed him. The next morning, Janet called the agency and requested a transfer. She couldn't work for Kang anymore, couldn't face him after what they'd shared. The agency was reluctant. Apparently Kang paid premium rates and never caused trouble, but eventually agreed to send a replacement. Janet spent the day in her apartment, ignoring the 17 missed calls from an unknown number, trying to convince herself she'd made the right choice, but that evening, her door nearly splintered under the force of Kang's knocking. "Open this door, Janet," he commanded, his voice carrying clearly through the thin wood, "or I swear I'll break it down." She opened it, finding him disheveled and furious, his eyes wild with something that looked like fear beneath the anger. "You left," he accused, crowding into her space. "You let me hold you, let me touch you, let me show you everything I felt, and then you ran like I was nothing." "You are nothing," Janet lied, the words bitter on her tongue. "Last night was a mistake. I don't belong in your world, Kang. We both know it." His laugh was harsh and broken. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't wake up every day terrified that loving you will get you killed? But I can't stop. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But you're in my blood now, Janet. You're in my bones. And I'd rather have you for one day and lose everything than spend a lifetime without you. You don't love me, Janet whispered, tears streaming down her face. You don't even know me. I know you take your coffee with too much sugar and hate doing dishes. I know you hum when you're nervous and bite your lip when you're thinking. I know you're brilliant and brave and far too good for a man like me. And I know that when I'm with you, I'm not the devil of soul. I'm just Kang, a man who would burn the world down if it meant keeping you safe. He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me I'm alone in this, and I'll walk away. But don't lie to me, Janet, don't lie to us. She couldn't. God help her, she couldn't. I feel it, she admitted brokenly. But feeling it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it safe. Then I'll make it safe, Kang vowed fiercely. Whatever it takes, whoever I have to destroy. Just don't run from me again. Promise me, Janet. Promise you'll stay. Against every logical objection, against every fear and doubt, Janet nodded. I promise. The following week, Janet moved into Kang's penthouse, not as his maid, but as something far more dangerous and precious. He'd converted one of his guest rooms into a space just for her, filling it with books and art supplies and soft things that contrasted sharply with the cold minimalism of the rest of his home. But most nights, she fell asleep in his arms, his body curled protectively around hers as if he could shield her from the world through sheer will alone. You need to meet my inner circle, Kang said one morning over breakfast, his tone casual but his eyes serious. They need to understand that you're not just some passing interest. You're... He paused, searching for words. You're everything. And anyone who threatens you threatens me. Janet's stomach twisted with nerves. Will they accept me? A foreigner? Someone who isn't part of your world? Kang's hand covered hers, his grip firm and reassuring. They'll accept you because I command it. And because once they know you, they'll understand why I destroy kingdoms to keep you safe. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But I won't lie to you, Janet. There will be people who see you as a weakness, who'll try to use you against me. That's why you need to trust me completely. No more running. No more hiding. We face this together. That evening, Janet met Kang's most trusted men in his private dining room. Yu Junseo, his second-in-command, studied her with calculating eyes before offering a respectful bow. So you're the woman who's made our boss human again, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. I wasn't sure it was possible. Junseo, Kang warned, but Janet smiled despite her nerves. I'm not sure I've made him human, she replied, but I'm trying my best. The other men, Baek Do-hyun, Kang's financial advisor, and Park Jin-woo, his head of security, were more reserved. But as the evening progressed, Janet felt them warming to her presence. They shared stories of Kang's ruthlessness in business, his strategic brilliance, but also moments of unexpected kindness that he'd never want publicized. By the time dessert arrived, even the stoic Jin-woo was smiling at her jokes. She's good for you, boss, Junseo said later, after Janet had excused herself to take a call. I've never seen you like this. Settled, almost happy. Kang's expression softened in a way his men rarely witnessed. She's everything, he admitted quietly, and that terrifies me more than any enemy ever could. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing intimacy. Kang taught Janet basic self-defense in his private gym, his hands guiding her through movements while his body pressed against hers in ways that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with desire. She learned to read his moods, to understand when he needed silence, and when he needed her touch to remind him he wasn't the monster the world believed him to be. But danger lurked at the edges of their happiness. Janet started noticing cars following her when she went shopping, shadows that disappeared when she turned to look directly at them. She mentioned it to Kang one night, and his entire body went rigid with fury. How long? He demanded, already pulling out his phone. A few days, maybe a week, Janet admitted. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid. Kang made 3 calls in rapid succession, his voice cold and commanding. By morning, he'd tripled her security detail and implemented protocols that made her feel simultaneously protected and trapped. I know it feels excessive, he said, pulling her into his arms when she protested, but until I know who's watching you and why, I can't take chances. You're my greatest strength and my biggest vulnerability, Janet. Losing you would destroy me. Later that week, Kang had to attend a high-profile business gala, the kind of event where crime lords mingled with politicians and everyone pretended the lines between legal and illegal didn't blur beyond recognition. He'd initially planned to go alone, to keep Janet away from that world, but she'd insisted on accompanying him. If I am part of your life now, I need to be part of all of it, she'd argued. I won't hide in your penthouse like some shameful secret. Now, standing beside him in a stunning red gown that had made his eyes darken with possessive appreciation, Janet understood why he'd been reluctant. The glittering ballroom was filled with dangerous people wearing expensive masks, their smiles sharp and their eyes calculating. She felt exposed despite being fully clothed, aware of how many people were studying her, the foreigner who'd somehow captured the devil of Soul's attention. "Stay close to me," Kang murmured, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. "And remember, you're mine. Everyone here needs to understand that." The evening progressed smoothly until a man approached them during dinner. Tall, handsome, with Western features and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Kang," he greeted in perfect Korean. "I heard rumors you'd found yourself a companion. I didn't believe them until now." "Marcus," Kang replied, his voice glacial. "I thought you were still in Hong Kong." "I was, but business brought me back to Seoul." Marcus's gaze slid to Janet, lingering in a way that made Kang's jaw clench. "You have exquisite taste. She's absolutely stunning." "She's also not up for discussion," Kang said flatly. "Janet, this is Marcus Chen, a business associate. Marcus, this is Janet Johnson, my girlfriend." The possessive emphasis on the last word was unmistakable, but Marcus seemed unfazed. "Girlfriend," he repeated thoughtfully. "How modern of you, Kang. I remember when you used to say relationships were liabilities." "People change," Kang replied, his hand tightening on Janet's waist. "Apparently." Marcus turned his full attention to Janet, his smile sharpening. "Tell me, Miss Johnson, what's it like being involved with Seoul's most dangerous man? Do you find the danger exciting, or are you simply naive about what he's capable of?" "Marcus!" Kang's voice carried a lethal warning, but Janet placed her hand on his arm, stopping him. "I find it interesting," she said calmly, meeting Marcus's gaze directly, "that you assume I'm either an adrenaline junkie or a fool. Has it occurred to you that I might simply love him? That who he is, all of him, is exactly what I want?" Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Respect, maybe, or calculation. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Well, Kang, you've certainly found someone with spirit. I hope for her sake that your enemies don't discover how much she means to you." The threat was thinly veiled, and Kang's entire body vibrated with suppressed violence. "If anyone touches her," he said softly, each word precisely enunciated, "I will personally ensure they die screaming. And that includes old friends who've forgotten their place." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Message received. Enjoy your evening." He disappeared into the crowd, leaving tension crackling in his wake. "We're leaving," Kang announced, already guiding Janet toward the exit. "But the gala—" "I don't care about the gala. I need to get you somewhere safe. Now." They rode back to the penthouse in tense silence, Kang's jaw clenched and his hands fisted on his thighs. The moment they entered his home, he pulled Janet into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "I shouldn't have brought you," he said hoarsely. "I put a target on your back tonight." "You didn't put it there," Janet corrected, holding him tight. "It was already there the moment we decided to be together. We both knew this wouldn't be easy, Kang. but I'm not going anywhere. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. I love you, he said, the words raw and desperate. I don't know when it happened. Maybe the first moment I saw you, maybe gradually over these weeks, but I love you, Janet. And it terrifies me because loving you means I have something to lose, something I can't bear to lose. Tears pricked Janet's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. Even though it's insane, even though everyone thinks I'm crazy, I love you, Kang. All of you, the good, the bad, the dangerous, all of it. Their kiss was fierce and claiming, a reaffirmation of everything they'd confessed. Kang lifted her into his arms, carrying her to his bedroom with purposeful strides, and they spent the night reminding each other exactly what they were fighting for. The following morning brought catastrophe. Janet woke to find Kang already gone, a note on his pillow explaining he'd had to handle an emergency at one of his warehouses. She showered and dressed, planning to spend the day reading, when her phone rang with an unknown number. Hello, she answered cautiously. Ms. Johnson. The voice was unfamiliar, male, with a slight accent she couldn't place. I have a message for Lee Kang. Tell him that if he wants to see you alive again, he'll come to the old shipyard in Incheon. Alone. He has 2 hours. What? Janet's question cut off as her apartment door exploded inward, armed men flooding into the space before she could even scream. She fought, remembering the self-defense Kang had taught her, but she was outnumbered and outmatched. A cloth pressed over her mouth and nose, chemical sweet and nauseating, and darkness swallowed her whole. When she woke, she was bound to a chair in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, her head pounding and her vision blurry. Across from her sat Marcus Chen, looking perfectly composed as he sipped whiskey and watched her regain consciousness. Ah, you're awake, he said pleasantly. Good. I was beginning to worry we'd given you too much sedative. You're insane, Janet spat, testing her bonds and finding them professionally secured. Kang will kill you for this. Oh, I'm counting on him trying, Marcus replied, setting down his glass. You see, Ms. Johnson, Kang has something I want. Territory, resources, connections. But he's refused every reasonable offer I've made. So I decided to take something he wants. You're the leverage I need to make him see reason. You think he'll just hand over his empire for me? No, Marcus admitted. I think he'll try to save you, get himself killed in the process, and then I'll take his empire anyway. But at least this way is more entertaining. Hours crawled by in that warehouse, each minute an eternity as Janet waited for whatever nightmare came next. She heard Marcus making calls, coordinating with his men, preparing for Kang's arrival. Fear clawed at her throat, not for herself, but for Kang. She knew he'd come, knew he'd walk into an obvious trap, because losing her would destroy him more thoroughly than any ambush. Finally, as the sun began to set, the warehouse doors burst open. Kang strode in flanked by Junseo and a dozen armed men, his face a mask of cold fury that made even Marcus straighten in his chair. Let her go, Kang commanded, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. I don't think so, Marcus replied, standing and moving behind Janet's chair. His hand gripped her shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You're going to sign over your operations in Gangnam and Itaewon, and then you're going to disappear from Seoul, permanently. Kang's laugh was harsh and devoid of humour. You really think you can blackmail me with her life and walk away intact? You've underestimated how much I'm willing to burn for her, Marcus. Have I? Marcus pulled out a gun, pressing it to Janet's temple. She refused to flinch, refused to give him the satisfaction of her fear even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Because from where I'm standing, I have all the leverage. And from where I'm standing, Kang said coldly, you're a dead man who just doesn't know it yet. The standoff stretched taut, seconds feeling like hours. Then Kang moved, a subtle gesture to Junseo that Janet almost missed. Gunfire erupted, chaos exploding through the warehouse as Kang's men engaged Marcus's forces. Kang himself crossed the distance to Janet in 3 strides, his body shielding hers as bullets whizzed past them. "I've got you," he whispered fiercely, his hands making quick work of her bonds. "I've got you, and I'm never letting go again." Marcus tried to run, but Junseo cut off his escape, driving him back toward Kang with ruthless efficiency. When Marcus raised his gun toward Janet again, Kang didn't hesitate. His own weapon appeared as if by magic, and the shot he fired was precise, professional, and final. Marcus crumpled to the ground, his eyes wide with shock as his life bled out onto the dirty concrete. "It's over," Kang said, pulling Janet against him so tightly she could barely breathe. "It's over, and you're safe. I promise you're safe." The aftermath was a blur. Police sirens, questions, Kang's lawyers descending to control the narrative. Marcus Chen had been a known criminal. His attack on Janet, an act of aggression that Kang had defended against. The fact that Kang had his own criminal empire was conveniently overlooked by officials who knew better than to dig too deeply into the devil of Seoul's business. Back at the penthouse, Kang refused to let Janet out of his sight. He drew her a bath, washed her hair with gentle hands that still trembled slightly with residual adrenaline, and carried her to bed wrapped in his softest robe. "I almost lost you," he said hoarsely, his forehead pressed to hers. "When I got that call, when I realized someone had taken you, I felt something inside me break. Something I'm not sure can be repaired." "I'm here," Janet whispered, her hands framing his face. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. You saved me, Kang. You came for me just like you promised." "I'll always come for you," he vowed, "no matter what, no matter the cost. You're my everything, Janet. My heart, my soul, my reason for breathing, and I'm done being afraid of that." The next morning, Kang made a series of calls that would reshape his entire empire. He promoted Junseo to handle more day-to-day operations, distanced himself from the most violent aspects of his business, and began the slow process of legitimizing his holdings.
"This is going to be the best one yet."
"I can't wait to taste it."
"I can't give you a safe life," he told Janet over breakfast, "but I can give you a safer one, and I can make sure that what happened yesterday never happens again." "You're really doing this?" Janet asked, studying the man who'd spent a decade building a criminal empire, now planning to dismantle portions of it for her. "Changing everything?" "You changed me first," Kang replied simply. "Now I'm just catching up." The following weeks brought more changes than Janet could have imagined. Kang introduced her to his family, a disapproving mother who thawed slightly when she saw how happy Janet made her son, a younger sister who immediately adored her, and a father whose respect Kang had been chasing his whole life and finally seemed to earn. They attended charity galas where Kang was introduced as a legitimate businessman, his past quietly forgotten by those who valued his money more than his methods. But the most significant change came 3 months after the warehouse incident. Kang had been acting strangely all week, nervous in a way Janet had never witnessed, checking his phone constantly, disappearing for mysterious meetings. She'd started to worry he was pulling away, that the reality of their relationship had finally become too much. Then, on a Saturday evening, he took her to the rooftop garden of his penthouse, a space she'd always loved for its view of Seoul sprawling beneath them in glittering lights. The garden had been transformed with thousands of flowers, candles creating a path to the center where Kang waited, looking devastating in a black suit and holding a small velvet box. "Janet," he said as she approached, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "The first time I saw you, something inside me recognized you. Recognized that you were the missing piece I'd been searching for without knowing I was incomplete. You've made me want to be better, to build something worthy of you. And I know I'm not perfect. I know my past is dark and my future uncertain. But I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." He dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring, a single diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the candlelight and threw rainbows across his face. Marry me, Janet. Be my wife, my partner, my everything. Let me spend forever showing you that you made the right choice when you didn't run from the monster everyone said I was. Tears streamed down Janet's face as she dropped to her knees in front of him, her hands framing his beloved face. You were never a monster, she whispered. You were just a man who hadn't found his reason to be more. And yes, I'll marry you. Yes to forever. Yes to everything. Kang slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then kissed her with a desperation and joy that made her heart soar. Around them, his closest friends emerged from hiding. Jun Seo, Do Hyun, Jin Woo, his family, all applauding and cheering as Kang swept Janet into his arms and spun her in circles, laughing with a freedom she'd never heard from him before. They were married 6 months later in a ceremony that blended Korean traditions with touches of Janet's own heritage. She walked down the aisle in a stunning hanbok, customized to accommodate her curves, her natural hair styled in elaborate braids woven with flowers. Kang wept when he saw her, actual tears streaming down his face as he watched the woman he loved more than life itself coming toward him to seal their forever. The reception was a celebration that lasted into the early morning hours, with toasts and dancing and joy that felt almost surreal after everything they'd survived to reach this moment. But the best moment came late in the night, when Kang pulled Janet onto the dance floor for a private slow dance, the guests having finally departed and the venue theirs alone. I can't believe you're really mine, he murmured against her hair, that I get to keep you forever. Forever, Janet confirmed, her arms tight around his neck. Through everything, the danger, the darkness, the light. I'm yours, Kang. Always. 1 year later, Janet stood in their penthouse nursery, decorating the room that would soon house their daughter. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, feeling the baby kick beneath her palm as Kang entered the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind. She's active today, Janet said with a smile, leaning back into his embrace. She's strong, Kang corrected, his hand covering hers on her stomach. Like her mother. Beautiful and fierce and absolutely perfect. He turned Janet in his arms, his eyes soft with a contentment she'd never imagined possible that first day she'd walked into his life. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not running when you should have, for seeing past the monster to the man beneath, for giving me a reason to be better and a family I never thought I deserved. He kissed her softly, reverently. You saved me, Janet. In every way a person can be saved. And you saved me right back, she whispered. Now stop being so sentimental and help me hang these curtains before our daughter arrives and we're too exhausted to care about decorating. Kang laughed, that free, genuine laugh that still took her breath away, and complied. And as they worked together to prepare for the next chapter of their impossible love story, Janet knew with absolute certainty that they'd made it. Through danger and darkness, through fear and uncertainty, through every obstacle the world had thrown at them, their love had not just survived, it had thrived. And as their daughter was born 3 weeks later, placed into Kang's trembling arms while he wept with joy, Janet understood that this was what they'd been fighting for all along. Not just survival, but this perfect moment of family and hope, and a future built on the foundation of a love that had conquered everything in its path. The devil of soul had found his angel, and together they'd created heaven in the midst of hell. And that, Janet thought, as she watched her husband cradling their newborn daughter with infinite gentleness, was the greatest victory of all.